imagine you're sitting at your laptop right now. The cursor is it's blinking steadily on the Our Story section of your Weddizer
Oh,
profile.
yeah, that blinking cursor is intimidating.
Right, because you're getting married and you want to be authentic. You really do.
Of course.
But, I mean, if you tell the absolute unfiltered truth about what it took to actually get to this point.
Like the panic attacks or the really intensive therapy.
Exactly. The therapy, the incredibly toxic exes, if you put all that on there, half your extended family is going to drop their morning coffee.
They really would.
Yeah.
It's a lot for people to process.
So today we are staring down this, what we're calling the vulnerability paradox.
Because we live in this culture that basically demands authenticity as a baseline, right?
Yeah.
But it rarely equips us with the tools to navigate the fallout of all that openness.
Yeah, there is a massive and honestly often dangerous gap between being vulnerable and actively protecting your peace.
Absolutely. And that gap is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive.
We are pulling from a really comprehensive guide called Naming Therapy and Trauma Openly Without Oversharing.
It's a fantastic source.
It really is. And our mission today is to extract the exact strategies you need to protect your peace while staying completely authentic.
And we're going to apply these frameworks specifically to high-stakes life milestones.
Right, like planning a wedding and documenting it on platforms like Weddizer, because that's where the pressure to, summarize your whole life story it's at its absolute peak.
The stakes here are incredibly high because knowing how to curate your narrative, it isn't about deception.
No, not at all.
It's not about presenting some fake, sanitized version of your life. It is a critical skill for maintaining your personal dignity and your relational health.
Which is so important in this era of just constant information overload.
Exactly. When we lack a framework for our own emotional boundaries, the external world, usually fueled by the dopamine loops of digital platforms, will happily dictate those boundaries for us.
And that almost never works out to our benefit.
Rarely. Very rarely.
So let's start with the fundamental assumption of the text, which is that, silence isn't the goal here.
Right. The guide makes a very strong case that acknowledging trauma is a necessary step in the healing process.
But it's not just about, getting it off your chest in the colloquial sense.
No, it's deeper than that. There is an actual physiological shift that happens when we articulate these experiences out loud.
Okay, unpack that for me. What kind of shift?
Well, there's a profound neurological mechanism at play here. When a traumatic event occurs, or when we're triggered by a memory of past trauma, the amygdala...
That's the emotional fight or flight center of the brain, right?
Exactly. The amygdala becomes highly activated, and the experience is stored more as a raw sensory fragment rather than, a coherent linear story.
Wow, okay. So it's just raw data floating around.
Yes, but when you give language to that experience, you are essentially forcing the brain to engage the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, interesting.
You're actively building neural pathways that translate a physiological panic response into a structured narrative.
So by simply putting a name to the feeling, you are literally downgrading the internal threat level.
You take it from this visceral, amorphous terror to a tangible concept that you can actually examine.
You move from being the subject of the trauma to the narrator of it.
That's a great way to put it. It builds self-awareness, it gives you clarity over your own triggers, and it fundamentally alters your relationship with the memory itself.
And the text mentions it reduces stigma too, right?
Right. And you stop gaslighting yourself about whether the pain was real because you've given it an objective title. You validate your own emotions.
But okay, here is where the friction happens in the real world. That transition from internal processing to external sharing is incredibly delicate.
Oh, it's tightrope walk.
We've all been in a room when someone crosses that invisible line from healthy disclosure into absolute oversharing.
Yeah, and it instantly puts everyone's nervous system on edge.
Right. It's like, oh, okay, think of healthy sharing, like inviting someone into your living room. It's tidy, it's intentional.
I like that.
But oversharing is like dragging a stranger into your messy attic and locking the door.
That is a very vivid analogy.
Well, I also think about it like an industrial pressure valve. With a mechanical pressure valve, you have to release a certain amount of steam to keep the engine from exploding.
Right. That's the healthy sharing. It keeps you functioning.
But if you blow the valve completely off without warning, you lose all the internal energy you need to power your own healing.
And you end up scalding everyone standing nearby.
Exactly. So let me ask you this. The text mentions that sharing should feel empowering, not draining. But in the moment, how do we actually tell the difference between healthy sharing and oversharing?
That's the million-dollar question. The listener who gets scalded in your analogy is instantly put into a defensive posture. They retreat.
Because it's too much heat.
Right. So the person sharing, who was likely just seeking connection or validation, ends up feeling more isolated and rejected than before.
That's tragic, honestly.
It is. That's the core mechanical difference. Healthy sharing is intentional, it's relevant to the conversation, and it's shared with trusted individuals.
And it's emotionally processed before being expressed, right?
Yes, crucially. Whereas oversharing is revealing deeply personal details too quickly. It's a real-time, unprocessed release of pressure.
Like seeking validation from the wrong audience entirely.
Exactly. You're seeking emotional regulation from an audience that simply isn't equipped to provide it, and it always results in regret or discomfort afterward.
So if oversharing comes from a lack of emotional readiness, we need a real practical toolkit for how to talk about our mental health without crossing that line.
We do. Which leads us perfectly into the guide's specific rules for discussing therapy and trauma.
Yeah, let's walk through those. The text outlines 4 essential steps for discussing therapy. What's the first one?
The first rule is know your purpose. You have to ask yourself, why am I sharing this?
Right, what's the goal here?
Is it to connect with a friend? Is it to educate someone about a boundary? Or are you desperately seeking emotional regulation from the person sitting across from you?
And if it's the latter, that's a red flag.
A massive one.
Yeah.
If you are relying on a casual acquaintance, a coworker, or, a social media audience to regulate your nervous system, you've already breached your own perimeter.
It really comes down to establishing an internal security perimeter.
Absolutely.
You have to decide beforehand what is public territory and what requires high-level clearance, because you don't owe anyone the unredacted files of your life.
Just because they ask a probing question doesn't mean you have to answer it fully.
Yeah.
That's rule number 2. Set personal boundaries.
Okay, so let's play this out. Let's say I know my why, and I've established my internal perimeter. How do I actually articulate this without sounding evasive or robotic?
That brings us to rule number 3.
Why?
Use general language. You extract the insight without exposing the raw data.
Right. So if I bring up a modality like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is fairly intensive trauma therapy,
Very intensive.
I don't necessarily want to explain the specific childhood memories I'm actively reprocessing, right?
No, you don't. Instead of detailing the EMDR session and the granular specifics of the memory, you use general phrasing.
Like what? What does the text suggest?
You could say something like, I've been working on my mental health lately, or therapy has helped me manage stress better, or I'm working with a specialized therapy to process old stress.
See, that seems highly dependent on the context, though, which I guess is rule 4. Read the room.
Exactly. Calibration is the entire game. If you're talking to your partner of 5 years, I'm processing old stress, sounds a little corporate and distant.
Yeah, they'd look at me like I was an alien.
Right. But if you're at a neighborhood barbecue or a professional setting, it's the perfect amount of information.
You really have to read the room. But what happens when we move from discussing therapy, which is just the tool, to discussing trauma, which is the actual wound itself?
The guidelines become much more rigid there. The foremost requirement when talking about trauma mindfully is share after processing.
Meaning you never share while you are still actively overwhelmed by the event.
Correct. You have to be in the healing phase, not the bleeding phase. If you share while you're still highly activated, you're likely just reliving the victimization out loud.
Which just reinforces that trauma loop in your brain, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to the next trauma rule. Focus on growth, not just pain. This is a crucial pivot point in the text.
Okay, let me push back on that for a second.
Go for it.
If someone asks me about a deeply difficult period and I immediately pivot to what I learned, doesn't that inadvertently minimize the harm that was done to me?
It's a valid concern.
Because sometimes things are just terrible, and wrapping it up in a neat little bow of growth feels disingenuous, like I'm letting the person who hurt me off the hook.
It's a really nuanced distinction. Focusing on growth doesn't mean denying the pain or absolving anyone. It means you center your own agency in the aftermath.
Oh, I see.
When you exclusively recount the granular details of the harm done to you, you anchor your brain in the past in a state of powerlessness.
You're stuck in victimhood.
Right. But when you focus on how you adapted, survived, or sought help, you anchor your brain in the present. You maintain your dignity.
You command the narrative rather than letting the narrative command you. I love that. And rule 3 for trauma is protect emotional safety. Right. choose trusted individuals.
Always. You must choose people who respect the story.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me. Let's say I'm at that dinner party. I use that calibrated, general language.
Okay, setting the scene.
I say, it was a rough year, but I've really learned how to advocate for my own needs. And the person across from me leans in and goes, oh, wow, but what actually happened? Was it your job? Was it your marriage?
Oh, wow, they just completely bulldozed the boundary.
Exactly. How do we hold that boundary without making it incredibly awkward?
Well, we've all encountered that person. They're treating your lived experience as entertainment.
Yes. Gossip, basically.
This is where you deploy the firm pivot, using the principles of protecting your emotional safety and intentional communication.
Sure.
You don't apologize for having a boundary.
So what do you say?
You maintain the general language and immediately offer an off-ramp. You say, it was a complex situation, but I'm just glad to be moving forward. Anyway, I heard you recently changed careers. How is that transition going?
Oh, that's smooth. You just firmly close the topic.
You close the door and offer a new, safe subject. Your emotional safety always supersedes their curiosity.
That makes total sense. But, real-time pivoting is one thing when you can read a physical room.
Trey.
Reading a digital room is entirely different, which leads us perfectly into how these boundaries apply to social media and specifically milestone platforms.
The digital landscape is tricky. The source text has a very strong warning about the social media trap.
Yeah, it says social media has totally blurred the lines between public and private life.
It has. It's significantly increased the risk of oversharing because the digital landscape thrives on raw, unedited emotion. It conflates visibility with validity.
And we're heavily incentivized by algorithmic dopamine to just bleed on the timeline.
But the internet is an inherently unsafe container for unprocessed trauma.
What are the specific guidelines the text gives for safe online sharing?
There are a few key tips. First, avoid posting in emotionally intense moments. Wait until you've cooled down.
No 2 a.m. ranting. Got it.
Exactly. Second, keep details minimal. Third, focus on insights over raw experiences. And finally, always remember that content is permanent. Context is entirely stripped away online.
And your audience is largely anonymous or at least emotionally disconnected from your actual day-to-day well-being.
Right. They aren't there to support you. They were there to consume content.
This brings us right back to that opening scenario. I want to bring the focus heavily onto Weddizer.
Let's do it. It's the perfect case study.
Because weddings are major life events. They bring up intense emotional reflection. You are synthesizing your life, your relationships, your whole journey up to this point.
And Weddizer is a lifestyle platform used to celebrate love. It explicitly encourages meaningful storytelling.
Right. You have your registries, your RSVP tools, and that ubiquitous Our Story page. It wants the romance, the hurdles you overcame.
But the challenge is, how do you tell your profound, authentic love story on Weddizer if your journey involved past trauma or intense therapy?
Exactly. If getting down the aisle meant surviving a deeply abusive past relationship or spending years unlearning toxic attachment styles, what do you write?
Well, the text advice applies directly here. Weddizer encourages storytelling, but with intention and class.
Intention and class. I like that.
There is a massive gulf between telling a meaningful story and publishing a clinical intake form. This is where the growth over pain rule is vital.
Okay, let's draft this out. Let's say I'm staring at that text box on Weddizer right now.
Okay.
How do I capture the magnitude of what I've overcome without trauma dumping on my extended family?
You operate through the lens of balanced emotional expression. You extract the high-level insights about your personal growth and your readiness for a healthy marriage.
So what's a bad example? What should I avoid?
Instead of writing a raw, trauma-filled bio like, after my narcissistic ex destroyed my self-esteem, I spent 3 years in therapy before I met someone who didn't lie to me.
Yikes. Yeah, that would make the guests uncomfortable.
Very. It elevates the narrative of the pain rather than the growth.
So how do we elevate the narrative of the growth instead?
You say something more like, after taking time to deeply understand what true partnership requires and doing the internal work to show up as my best self, I was finally in a place to recognize the incredible love right in front of me.
Oh, wow. That is a masterful translation.
Isn't it? It implicitly acknowledges a period of struggle and intentional healing, the internal work.
It honors the difficulty of your journey, but it centers the celebration of the relationship you are currently building.
Exactly. Rather than memorializing the relationship that harmed you.
So let me ask you this. What does this all mean for someone drafting their story on Weddizer right now?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the text clearly addresses this fear people have.
The fear that leaving out the dark parts of your past is essentially lying by omission, because it feels like you're presenting a sterilized, curated version of yourself.
Right. But keeping details minimal and focusing on empowerment is not lying.
It's not.
No. It touches on a fundamental misunderstanding of what a public milestone platform is designed for. A wedding website is a public-facing celebration. It's not a comprehensive autobiography, and it's certainly not a therapy session.
That is such a crucial distinction.
Practicing restraint is not deception. It is an exercise in boundaries. The text calls it practicing balanced emotional expression and maintaining class and intention.
So your trauma is valid, but as the text says, it is yours to protect.
Precisely. Treating your vulnerability as something precious rather than as content to be consumed by acquaintances is the ultimate form of self-respect.
Man, that's powerful. But, writing your story on Weddizer is only one part of a milestone.
That's true. It's just the digital front.
The other part is dealing with your actual partner and your loved ones behind the scenes during these high-stress periods.
The real-life relationships.
Right. We've established the digital perimeter, but let's look behind the curtain. You're actively planning the wedding. The logistical stress is astronomical.
Managing vendor contracts, budgets, family dynamics.
It's a lot, and we assume that because this is our closest partner or fiancé, that we don't need boundaries with them.
Which is a highly dangerous assumption. We frequently confuse intimacy with the complete absence of boundaries.
Yes, we think they should just carry our entire emotional load with us at all times.
But true intimacy actually requires a profound respect for the other person's emotional capacity at any given moment.
The source material has guidelines for this too, right? The 3 rules for relationships.
Yes, it unpacks them clearly. Rule 1 is, communicate gradually. Trust is built over time. You share step by step, not all at once.
Even with someone you're about to marry.
Especially with someone you're about to marry, particularly during a high-stress transition.
Okay, what's rule 2?
Respect mutual comfort levels. You have to honor the listener's boundary if they aren't ready for a deep conversation. Trust and emotional load-bearing must be constantly calibrated.
Give me an example of what that looks like in the wedding planning context.
Well, if your partner is currently overwhelmed with the logistical nightmare of finalizing a seating chart, their cognitive load is maxed out.
Oh, for sure. Seating charts are the worst.
If you choose that exact moment to unload a heavy, sudden realization about your childhood abandonment issues, you are engaging in Rule 3's biggest don't.
Which is avoid trauma dumping.
Exactly.
Let's zero in on that phrase for a second, trauma dumping, because it's become a heavily diluted buzzword recently.
It really has. People use it on social media to describe any kind of complaining or venting.
Right, but in a clinical or communicative sense, what are we actually defining here from the text?
Functionally, trauma dumping is the non-consensual unloading of severe, heavy emotional content onto a listener without considering their capacity to process it.
It's like tossing a 100-pound barbell to your partner without warning them to catch it.
That's a perfect analogy.
Even if they love you, and even if they're strong, if they aren't braced for it, you're going to pull their muscles. They're going to get knocked over.
And they will naturally resent you for the impact. The text links trauma dumping directly to strained relationships and severe discomfort.
Because doing this repeatedly forces your partner out of the role of an equal teammate, right?
Yes, and into the role of an unqualified therapist. This connects right back to life milestones like weddings. Stress is already incredibly high.
So trauma dumping can sabotage communication with your partner right when healthy connection is needed the most.
Precisely.
So how do we avoid that enmeshment? Do we just, suppress the realization about the childhood abandonment issues until after the honeymoon?
No, you don't suppress it. You seek active consent before sharing. You check their bandwidth.
How does that sound in practice?
You say, I'm having some really heavy realizations about my past today. Do you have the bandwidth to talk through it tonight, or should I bring this to my therapy session on Tuesday?
Wow, you just give them the agency to say, I love you, but I am entirely depleted right now.
Exactly. It requires an incredible amount of self-awareness, but it saves the relationship from taking unnecessary damage.
Avoiding these pitfalls like trauma dumping and oversharing, it isn't just about protecting others, though, is it?
No, fundamentally it's about protecting yourself. Which leads us to the final analysis of the text, the benefits or the ROI of balanced expression.
The return on investment. Let's talk about the before and after of getting this right. What are the core benefits the text outlines?
Well, synthesizing the text, the benefits are building stronger relationships, maintaining your personal dignity, feeling emotionally in control, and avoiding something called vulnerability fatigue.
Vulnerability fatigue. What exactly is that?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, vulnerability fatigue is what happens when we ignore the rule of emotional readiness. It's that exhaustion that comes from bleeding on the page and getting nothing but awkwardness or rejection in return.
Ah, I see. So balanced expression is the antidote to that fatigue.
Exactly. It shifts the locus of control back to you. When we learn to share without oversharing, we maintain our emotional sovereignty.
The guide provides a really stark contrast in how we frame our narratives, doesn't it?
It does, and examining the syntax of it is incredibly revealing.
Let's do a quick role play of the text's explicit example of how to reframe a narrative.
Okay, let's hear the before phrasing, the oversharing version.
The before is, I went through a deeply traumatic breakup that destroyed me emotionally.
Oof. Yeah, that's heavy. And what's the after, the healthy sharing version?
I went through a challenging relationship and therapy helped me grow from it.
Okay, let's analyze why that second phrase is so much more effective. Because they both technically communicate the same past event. Right, but look at the grammatical structure. In the first sentence, the trauma is the active subject, and the speaker is the passive object receiving the destruction.
Destroyed me emotionally. Yeah, you're the victim of the sentence itself.
And it places a massive, unmanageable burden on the listener to somehow fix or comfort a destruction that has already occurred.
It creates a social paralysis. The
Yeah.
listener has nowhere to go with that. Like, they can't undestroy you.
Exactly. But in the second sentence, the speaker is the active subject. You navigated it. You did the work.
It communicates the experience without exposing the unnecessary details. It retains your power.
And it doesn't overwhelm the listener. It invites connection rather than demanding rescue.
It's a completely different posture in the world. You aren't hiding your history, you're just refusing to let it consume the room.
Exactly.
So speaking directly to you, the listener, whether you are updating your Weddizer profile tonight, or attending a casual family gathering, or just talking to your partner, you hold the pen to your own story.
You really do.
You can be authentic without bleeding on the page.
You have the ultimate authority over your internal perimeter. You can honor your past without letting the internet, or the people around you, strip mine your vulnerability.
So just to briefly recap our journey today, we explored the paradox of modern vulnerability, right?
We did.
We defined that hard line between healthy sharing and oversharing. We learned the 4 steps of therapy: talk purpose, boundaries, general language, and reading the room.
And we applied it all to digital storytelling on Weddizer, which is huge.
And finally, we explored how to avoid trauma dumping in relationships so you don't crush your partner with a 100-pound barbell of unprocessed emotion.
It's a lot to take in, but it's incredibly practical.
It is. So to wrap us up, what's a final thought we can leave the listener to mull over? Something that builds on the source material.
This raises an important question that I think everyone should consider. The text teaches us how to curate our stories to protect our peace today. But think about the digital footprint you are leaving behind. Decades from now, when someone looks back at how you described your life's milestones, your struggles, and your celebrations, what is the legacy of the narrative you are choosing to write right now?
Wow, that's deep.
Are you leaving a record of your pain or a monument to your growth?
A monument to your growth. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep your boundaries strong. We'll see you next time.